the gut level. It's the gut level. Yeah, it's the gut level. It's the gut level.
You have now tuned into the Gut Level Podcast.
Rome, Big Daddy Rome.
What it is.
Roman, what's good?
Young CB3 on
You
this
know.
beautiful daylight savings day.
Correct.
Happy daylight
Spring
saving.
forward.
Right. Yeah. You spring forward, fall back.
Yep. I prefer the fall back a little bit
100%.
to the spring forward, but
Yeah. Anytime you could gain something for free, I always love it.
Episode number 5.
Numero 5.
There you go. Spanish is
Bam.
still on point, even being up in the Central Coast. There we go.
It is what it is. Exciting, man. Exciting episode today is, look, what the gut level is about is today's episode. Today's episode is what we are about. It's why we're here, to have these type of conversations, to talk about topics like this. So I'm stoked.
Yeah, before we dive in, I mean, last week we talked about anger.
Oof.
It was a
Oof.
banger, as usual. And you know that if you come to the gut level, you can just expect a banger.
Banger after banger, baby.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, man. Last week's episode, anger, something that we all deal with, something that's so relatable, yet something that's so different and individualized to everyone, and something that I know I deal a lot with. You do too. So, as always,
Yeah.
if you haven't checked it out, go watch it. What are you doing? What are you doing?
For
Go
sure.
watch it.
And I've got the perfect mug for today. You probably can't see it in the camera, but or for last week's episode about anger, it says meditation because murder is wrong.
So they say. So they say.
Fitting. The good, the bad, and the ugly, you know?
Yeah.
So, as you mentioned, though, today, another banger at the gut level. The war on masculinity. Is there a war on masculinity? Is there not? What is that about? Where did that come from? I don't know.
We're going to answer all of that and more. But it certainly is, something that, when you hear that question, the war on masculinity, it's thought provoking, somewhat provocative. Is there a war? What is masculinity? I
Well, I
like
think
that too.
Yeah, and what I'm stoked to dive into really with it is, I mean, like, look, is there a war on masculinity? Is there not? But also, why is this particular conversation so critical to the gut level and to us as men? How do we define masculinity? Which is going to be interesting, right?
Yeah.
2 perspectives. So we're going to dive into that. And then, right, like, what's the sentiment here? Like, what is society saying about this? What's currently out there about this? These things like toxic masculinity, and there's just going to be a lot wrapped up in today's episode. So,
Oh yeah, it's good. It's gonna be good, man. Exciting. But as always, before we get started and jump into today's episode, here is a word from, well, us. Hey guys, welcome to The Gut Level. Look, as always, we appreciate you tuning in and checking us out. But before we get started, we do want to share a couple things with you.
The Gut Level is a safe, inclusive community, you guys. So as long as you identify as a human being, you are welcome here. So whether you're a man, woman, LGBTQ, black, white, brown, gender non-binary, you're welcome here to a first-hand, real-time accounting of men's transformation and growth. You might ask, whose? Ours.
Yeah, look, we started this channel to help men evolve by creating connection and inspiring growth, with the point being to really remove that experience of isolation and the aloneness of being a man.
And when we remove that, what happens? We become a part of a tribe and a community.
Yeah, look, disclaimer, we do not have the solutions nor the answers, and we are not experts. Our only qualifications is that we're just two regular ass dudes
helping to normalize men's humanity one experience at a time. So, welcome, like the video, subscribe to the channel, join our community below, and welcome to The Gut Level.
Enjoy the episode. Bam.
It's good.
Good dudes, man. Good dudes. I know those dudes personally. I
You
can
do?
vouch for them. Good peeps.
They're good looking.
Well, I wasn't going to say all that, but yeah, now that you bring it up, you're right.
Every week, starting off, 4 questions. Romy Rome, let's start you off.
Hit me.
What's a new podcast you found this week?
Oh, new podcast. Rapid fire. Okay, I found one. I'm one of those guys that I like famous people for whatever reason. Their celebrity status creates some, I don't know, it just makes them legit to me. And I found one that is with 3 famous people, and it's called Smart Less, and it's like less smart, smart less. Anyway, it's great. It has Jason Bateman,
Right.
Sean Hayes, and Will Arnett, right?
Okay.
And those guys alone are just characters, right? Good conversation, bringing up, some similar type stuff that we are, but their format is something that I really find interesting, because what they do is every week they'll have a guest on, so it's 4, and every week one of the people will bring that guest in, but the other 2 won't know who it is for that week. So like they had Robert Downey Jr. on, right? And so one of them knew and was prepared, had questions for him. The other 2 were going into that interview completely blind. And so then what happens is you get these authentic, on the spot conversations that are motivated right there. You can kind of see it and how it all plays out between them. Anyway, fantastic. Smart Less. You could check it out on Spotify, anywhere that they have podcasts. As always, link will be in the description below. Check them out. Smart Less.
Love it.
Cool. Question number 2, young Christopher. What book have you read that has helped you to define success?
Well, let's say success in the context of masculinity, and we're talking about defining masculinity today. And so what I'll say is, the book that's probably had the most profound impact on how I define masculinity and success in that realm of being a man is The True Heart of a Man. I've probably brought this up several times. And it's by an author, Hanalei, shout out. Link in the description, go check it out. But really the focus was more on how do we shift from, provider, protector, kind of the societal definition of masculinity to, having a more expansive look at our belief systems and our emotional intelligence and the things that we all deal with, but a lot of us, including myself until more recently, was really blocked off from and really closed off from. So True Heart of a Man, I know I sent it to you. I send it to a lot of guys, recommend
Yeah.
it all the time. Definitely go check it out.
Boom.
Number
Yeah.
3, and I'm loving this question. What's a new fact you learned this week, Rome?
There's so many ways that you can go with this, right? It's like, do I go with something that's super deep and insightful, or do I just pick something that's, random and fun? And so the first fact is that a jiffy is 1/100th of a second. It's actually a measurement of time. So anytime somebody says, "I'll be there in a jiffy," lying. That's cap. BS. But the other fact that I found really interesting is that those weird hats that chefs wear,
Yeah.
right? Well, each chef hat has 100 pleats, and they go around it, right? And I didn't know that this was an actual thing, but it has significance. The reason that there's 100 pleats on a chef's hat is because there is 100 ways to cook an egg. So that's the meaning behind all the pleats on a chef's hat, is basically that, hey, there's no right or wrong way to cook a meal. It's 100% subjective. You as the chef are the artist. I just thought that was interesting because you don't often hear that. Typically with careers, with jobs, with lines of work, it's like, okay, this is the way to do it. Do it this way, and all other ways are wrong. And I think that is insightful, because the conversation that we're having today, it really is subjective as well. There is no right or wrong way. There's not one, definition of what masculinity is. It really is based on your personal experience, what you believe and what you think. So I thought that was interesting. I wanted to share it. And now chef's hat, 100 pleats, 100 ways to cook an egg.
Boom.
Bam.
You heard it. You heard it here.
Question number 4, young Christopher. You, my friend, are on LinkedIn. I know very little about that world. I'm more of an Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, but you are on LinkedIn. What I know about LinkedIn is that that's where a lot of successful business people, entrepreneurs, motivated inspirers, you are on there. Your content is amazing. Everyone, please go check out Young CB3 on LinkedIn. But my question is, who is the LinkedIn creator that you're vibing with that you think, damn, this person's dope? You need to check them out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot right now on LinkedIn, which is cool. And a lot of
Nice.
people are talking about far more than business. And I would say, again, in the context of today's episode with talking about masculinity, there's a guy I've been following and engaging with, Jubal Horton. And again, I'll have a link to his stuff down below. But he basically is working with tech dudes to help like redefine success and
Nice.
masculinity,
Nice.
in that world specifically. And so a lot of his content is really based around like shifting the old norms, the old perspectives, the old belief systems on what success is, and really
Mm,
helping guys get out in particular and like have fun, and play,
nice.
and using that as a way to continue to define and redefine success as a man. So
Dope.
Jubal Horton, shout out. Definitely go ahead and check him out on LinkedIn.
No doubt. No doubt. As always, guys, links in the description. We would love if you guys would like our video, comment down below, follow us on YouTube, go check out Chris on LinkedIn, check out our Instagram, TikTok. We're everywhere at the gut level. Come join our community, be a part of what we're doing. We're building this thing, and we want you guys to be involved with us.
No doubt. And those questions will be down below as well. So Roman and I are always interested in wanting to hear from you guys, and
Yes,
in terms of what your experience is, point us in the right direction, good people, interesting stuff, even if it's just a fun, silly fact about life,
100%.
or
Yeah,
anything for that
also,
matter. So
we're also going to be having guests on. So if you have someone, you found someone out there in the internet sphere that you find is, compelling, that would be a good guest, please, all recommendations. We're taking them all. We would love to learn more and find new people that could potentially be guests.
No doubt. Well,
No diggity.
I guess we should dive into that.
Oh.
So, every episode, one experience, two perspectives, and three invitations. So, our first experience today, or our one experience today, is the war on masculinity. Is there a war on masculinity?
Oof.
What's that all about? I don't
Oof.
know. So, Rome, lead us off. What's your perspective on the war on masculinity?
Man, where does one start to have that conversation? You know, it's like in preparation for these, you and I, we do kind of discuss what we're going to talk about, but then the rest of it, we're like, hey, let's not script anything. Let's have it all done on the spot, and that's
Right.
sometimes super easy, and sometimes it's difficult because conversations like this one, they're so intricate, right? There's so many complexities to masculinity, you know as you told me, when you go to find the definition of masculinity, there isn't one. So
Right.
it's like, how can you talk about something that doesn't have a clear definition? you know? And so I think therefore perspective is kind of the only catalyst to having that conversation. So my perspective with masculinity, as probably most people's, is one that is ever evolving, continually changing. And every day I'm learning more, I'm gaining new experience to kind of shape and form my idea and belief of masculinity. But I can tell you, when I was young, growing up, I didn't have any uh, male figure in my life as a kid. I didn't have any male role model. I do recall that, for the first couple years of my life, I did live with my biological birth father, before ultimately going into foster care and going through that process for many years, and then later being adopted by a very strong, man who is my father today. But I recall that my very first model of masculinity was my birth dad, and which was probably not the best, but as a kid, that was all I had. And the thing that I recall about him was that he was really into bodybuilding, right? He had this little apartment, and I remember as a kid there was all these posters of Arnold Schwarzenegger all over the walls, and he had this big weight set in the garage, and every day he was lifting, and he was jacked, man. And he was probably on the sauce, like a lot of dudes were and still are. But I remember thinking that to be a man means to be strong. And so
Mm,
my first characteristic of what masculinity is physical strength. And so I grew up watching movies with Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger and all these manly men, right? That were like, take no shit. I'm going in there. I'm handling business. I mean, the story of Rocky Balboa, right? Going in there and getting knocked down and coming back and working out and being strong. That's what I thought masculinity is. So as a kid, that was my goal, to be strong. And then I entered foster care system, where I was put into, a pretty profound experience of being bullied and picked on, and then I kind of withdrew into my shell. And for many years I didn't have any other role model or idea or concept of what masculinity is. I became a scaredy cat and afraid and shut down and wouldn't talk, and and then I was adopted by this man who was, contrastly very different than my birth father. And so my adopted father, he wasn't like physically imposing, right? He was more of like a typical dad, right? But he was smart. You know, he had his master's degree. He had a high position within the state government, right? Like he was well respected by people in the community. Like everyone knew who he was. He was a man about principles. You know, he was a Christian, was raised that way from birth. So he had strong morals. He had strong beliefs. He, you know, and that became my role model. And so, you know, very quickly it changed to, okay, I need to be smart, right? I need to be intelligent. I need to do well in school. And so I did that while also being an athlete, right? So then, like in athletics, it was all about being dominating, right? I played hockey at a high level. I played basketball. I played football. It was like, you got to be physically dominant, but also very smart, right? My idol was Michael Jordan, you know? And Michael Jordan wasn't big. He wasn't super strong. He was very athletic, but he had that drive and that mentality. So, you know, I started to like take all these different aspects and be like, cool, that's what masculinity is. Somebody that's physically dominant, imposing, strong, right? Intelligent, smart, driven, you know, well respected. And you know, and then I fell into addiction, and then like everything was lost. I didn't care. Now, after a couple years of dealing with addiction, being incarcerated, um, you know, being homeless, living that kind of grime lifestyle, coming out of that, and when I got sober, I had like a blank slate, you know, where I got to redefine everything. And with that, I started to look for different examples, new role models, you know, different people. And I did. You know, I found someone who became a mentor to me, and I wanted to be like him. And then I became a father, and then you know, I started looking towards other fathers as being role models and mentors and stuff. Anyway, over the years I've taken from all these different people to kind of create my own definition of masculinity. And what I have started to witness is that there, like I said, there is no one way. There is no one definition of what masculinity is. There isn't. And it's all subjective. So I could take from other people's experience, I could draw from other role models and mentors over the years, but ultimately it's what I choose to be masculine. And that in itself has also began to change. You know, what I used to think was you needed to be a strong provider, take care, you know, intelligent, successful. Successful was a key one. And then what I started to realize was it was more about being authentic, being able to be vulnerable, caring, loving. I have this little necklace that I wear, and it's got 3 rings on it. And each ring on it is it signifies something I want to be more. And the rings aren't strong, courageous, you know. They say loving, caring, and kind.
Mm.
And like I think by like societal standards or definitions, those typically wouldn't be something you would associate with masculinity. But for me, those are it. You know, I want to be loving because I think that love has a great impact on people. And that's ultimately what I want to do. I want to be caring because I'm a father. And like, that's my main objective today is to care for my kids. And I want to be kind because you never know the battle that somebody's currently going through. So we have a responsibility and an opportunity at all times to be kind. And that has such a significant impact. And so I think in kind of wrapping up my perspective, it's a journey. It's ever changing, ever evolving. There's no one way to define masculinity, but how I define masculinity today, and we'll get into the breakdown of the war on masculinity, but how I define it today is as a man, I do have certain responsibilities with my partner. I should be a protector. I should be a provider. That's what I want. As a father, I should also be a protector and a provider, but also I need to educate and raise and instill moral values and be a good example. And then in work, I want to be a leader. So leadership is up there as one of the mainstays. And then with my family, I want to be involved. I want to be present. I want to be authentic. And with my friends, it's the same way. And so masculinity is all encompassing of all those things, as well as, being able to take the 100 different pleats that are on that chef's hat and be like, cool, like in this situation with this person in this relationship, might need to show up this way or this way. And I can absolutely tell you that there is 100% a war on masculinity. Society, their views on masculinity have changed drastically over the years, but I'm not sure if that's necessarily a bad thing. Because, like my own perspective and my own experience, my views have changed drastically over
Right.
the years. It's a journey, but the way that it's going about this war on masculinity, I think we'll have some talking points as to that because that's not all good. However, before we dive into the breakdown, now that I've shared kind of my experience with masculinity and the journey that I've been on, I would love to hear yours, Chris. What is masculinity to you? How do you define it? How has it shaped and formed over the years? And then also, is there a war? What's your experience with that?
Yeah, and thanks for opening up and sharing your perspective, Rome. I love the fact that you and I come on and we get to be our true selves and real with it. And um, you know, my best answer to is there a war on masculinity is I don't know. Um,
Mm,
I think there's an interesting dialogue to be had in the breakdown and lots of interesting questions for us to dive into.
for
Um,
sure.
you know, and that historically speaking, there has been more or less a definition of masculinity for tens of thousands of years at this point, and it has started to shift in the last, call it
Mm,
40-ish years.
mm.
And where we are right now in 2023 is that there's a lot of conversation around gender and roles and what do these
Oh,
things
yeah.
mean. And so my perspective is that I came up in a way where I was conditioned to believe a certain thing, and I think most men, right, the first place we learn this, as you mentioned, is from our father. And um, what I picked up on and took in was that masculinity is very much about being the provider,
Mm,
and that being
yeah.
kind of primary of importance. And I say that because,
Yeah.
excuse me, my dad wasn't around a lot when I was a kid because he was out there hustling and grinding and building a career and
Right.
building a reputation and making money and providing for us. And, you know, I grew up until I was about 13, very middle class. Um, but I never wanted for anything, right?
Mm,
Like, and so, that's where, again, our stories, we come from very different, paths to where we are now.
yeah.
But that was my experience. Was I watched this man sacrificing himself, sacrificing time with
Mhm.
family, sacrificing fun and play, sacrificing kind of most everything for, again, what
Yeah.
I perceived, not that this was what was going on, but what I perceived was to make money, and to find
Right.
success and to be able to provide from a financial perspective for the family. And so I took a very similar route in adulthood, which became all about how do I make money, how do I provide, and really, again, in that same vein, almost like at all costs. Um,
Right.
and what was interesting on looking back on this is even in those times I'd be like, oh yeah, but like part of this making money is that I can go travel, or
Mm,
that I'll have more
yeah.
flexibility in that my dad didn't have. But the thing is, I totally got away from the ability to play, to have fun, to
Mm,
prioritize family, to prioritize relationships. So I like had this additional thought, which was like, yeah, if I can travel, if I can take time off of work. But when I look back to the first, call it like 10 years of my career, I wasn't able to actually not work. I wasn't able to do that. And so, um, and I didn't grow up in the relationship with my father in any type of emotional maturity. So,
oh,
for me, and kind of how I define masculinity now, and this term I continue to use around like expansive masculinity, was I had no role model in
mm,
terms of how to connect on an emotional level with another man. And so similar to what you said, right? It was, and I remember at 23, I thought I had figured out what a man was, which was you could fight, you could provide, you could physically stand up for yourself and people you loved. You could handle yourself in any situation, right? It was such a superficial definition of masculinity. And then, as I've grown and really in a lot of ways grown up, it's I love the subjective nature of this, and it's like one of the reasons I wore my Tupac Chopra shirt today. Because it's my favorite way to think about this now is that, and yeah, like Tupac's my favorite hip hop artist ever. And there's a lot in that, but Tupac was outspoken. He was assertive. He believed in impact and fought for things he believed in, and and made money and did all this from one side. And then obviously like Deepak Chopra being this other side of silent and strong and connected and emotionally intelligent. And like when I think about the blend of these, that's so much of how like I choose to define masculinity today for myself, is that, for me, it's all about being able to be kind of all of what I deem masculine, which, is strong, right? Like physically, I train my body a lot. So I'm strong. I can also find stillness and silence and be calm, right? And like allow the mind to turn off. I can make money. I can do all these things in business. I can be emotionally present and intelligent with my emotions. Continue to work on not being reactive and, more conscious of what's going on internally. And I continue to come back for me that like I defined my values a few years ago and they haven't changed, which is, which is that like the definition of who I want to be as a man, as you mentioned, kind of your personal definition, your perspective is that I want to be somebody that adventures in the world, and can adventure in the world. And I have to do things for my body and my mind and financially and all of these things to do that. Family, right? So the strong prioritization on family, friends, relationships, freedom, which again is an expansive term for me, which is like, I want to be free from like emotional burden, and I want to be free spiritually, and I want to have the financial freedom to do things. And I want my body to function in a certain way so that I can be free in that way. Impact, like that as a man, I want to impact, as and you touched on this a bit, and impact others. Right. And so there are things I believe deeply and I want to impact. And then love. Right. And so, you said kindness, right? And like kindness, love, how I show up in relationships, how I show up to the people, not only that I know and care about, but also just like a random person on the street, a homeless guy, right? I want to show up with this, just like being of love. And so, my definition is probably those things. And so I agree with you. That's like it's a constant evolution and a constant journey. But I'll stop there.
I love it, man. Thank you for sharing. And love is a big one,
Yeah.
And also to that point, like the multi layers, it's like in Shrek said, ogres are like an onion,
Well, for sure. I mean, look, we talk about that. Like for us, we're like constantly, in a sense, we've never used the term here, but like we're constantly peeling the onion. It's this like firsthand accounting of our growth. Right. And so my definition might change in a day. It might change in a month, a year, 3 years. I'm not sure. And it probably will continue to evolve over time. And so, but let's break this down. And so let's start with where we started on this. And so since you said that you think there's a war on masculinity, I want to know, what is that about? what is this war on masculinity? Why is it happening? Where is it happening? Just give me an idea of this.
Okay. I think I have found a good example, and it's within a question. So it's a bit of a rhetorical question, but I would love to get your thoughts. So the question is, would this fly today? Okay. Have you seen Conan the Barbarian?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. As a child, that was the definition of masculine. That movie is machismo into the maximum, right? In that movie, Conan the Barbarian has 3 rules, and he says this in the movie, right? And back then, people ate it up, man. They loved it. And his 3 rules were to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentations of their women. It's a famous quote. People, I don't know if it's still relevant, but back then it was like, woo, everyone loved that quote. The question is, would that quote fly today? If that was in a movie theater today, would there or would there not be outrage?
No, there would be outrage for sure.
Right.
But
So I think
that's also from the 80s though, the
that's what
movie.
I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Is within that, I think that that's a good example of the war on masculinity. Because back in the 80s, and we're not talking that long ago, is that was seen as acceptable, appropriate, and masculine. And today, that would be deemed a bunch of other, you know, adjectives. It would be sexist, it would be toxic for sure, and there would be people protesting. And so I think that in of itself is war. That's a war, right? And you can flip to any news channel today. You can go on any form of social media and you will see people and when this war started, I would have to say it was kind of mostly women, right? But now it's everyone. It's all encompassing, but there's outrage today where people can get canceled on all platforms for saying things that are deemed to be toxic masculinity, where just
So you're talking about like Andrew Tate or like some of these other like folks that are like getting canceled on like
right,
social.
totally. And there's 100 examples of that happening, and it's like, okay, like we live in a country where it's freedom of speech, right? So that's like a whole nother conversation. But even just like the subject matter that's being spoken about, you got to be careful today on how you approach things and how you talk about things, because there is a war on masculinity. Is the same things that we grew up thinking were masculine are deemed today to be toxic, you know? And, like, I don't know if that's true or not. That could very well be true. And I think for me, you say, "I don't know if there's a war." For me, it's I don't know if it's toxic or not. I just don't have enough, I guess, exposure to it. Some of it for sure, hands down toxic, we can do without. But there's a lot of stuff that's maybe borderline or definitely not toxic that's being labeled toxic, you know? And it's all personal opinions, it's all personal beliefs. We live in a society today that kind of gangs up on people, kind of gangs up on topics, you know and I'm not entirely sure that it's all fair or justified. Some of it
So
is.
so where I go with the idea of the war on masculinity is um I think there's definitely a lot on when it comes to, men being in their true power,
Mm,
right? And I think a lot of times what we get is like, oh, the gun violence problems are a male problem. The domestic
right,
violence problems are a male problem.
right,
These are related to men being misogynistic, right? The sexual
right,
assault stuff like
yeah,
misogyny and machismo and, racism and all of this stuff, right?
yeah,
which look, I think like we just have systemic racism, right? Like I'm a
True.
white guy and I know that like we've been conditioned, right, to be racist. Like that's just a reality, which is a wonderful another conversation for another day.
Yeah.
But I think like where I see potentially like there being more of a war is like, don't stand up and be strong. Don't be in your male
Mm.
power, right?
Mm.
When it comes to, even let's talk like sexually, right? Like with intimate partners, like how do, I'll say like women, how do women want us to show up,
Ooh.
sexually? Um,
Yeah.
right. And I believe that, you know, most want us to show up from a position of power and strength. I think that that's a turn on for a lot of women right now when that's taken the wrong way, and where guys go, oh yeah, like I'm going to do this even if you say no,
Mm.
or I'm going to be aggressive to a point that you don't want. There is this problem, and I think what happens is it's getting like lumped in, right?
Yeah.
So then like men are going like sexless, right? Like there is so much data
Yeah.
on which appears to present this idea that like men are terrified, right,
Yeah.
to have sex
Yeah.
with women. And right. So like, is
Yeah.
there a war on these particular elements of more traditional masculinity? Yeah, probably. Do we have to redefine it? Probably. Um, you know,
Well,
um,
hasn't it already started to be redefined? I mean, I keep going back to like role models, but the ideal man today is distinctly different than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I mean, I look at who, my son, he's 14, who he aspires to be like is like one of these, YouTubers that's, it wouldn't fall in the any of the traditional categories of masculine, right? They're somewhat lazy, don't work out, not strong, not physically imposing, maybe they're smart, but not like intellectually smart, definitely not street smart, they're somewhat motivated because they have a channel and a platform and they're doing stuff. And it's not, none of it is right or wrong. It's just different, you know. I think of like Theodore Roosevelt, right? One of our presidents. The dude used to go out and like hunt deers and like cruise around on horseback and stuff. And he was the president of our country, man. And that's who men wanted to aspire to be like. And then I look at the last, you know, couple presidents who aren't those things at all, not physically imposing, not strong, and it's like I would say that it's already been redefined, and I guess what is interesting to me is like when did that transition happen? Because you had said for thousands of years masculinity has been this, which is true. And now it's not that. When did that transition take place?
I mean, I'm not a historian by any means, but I think you look back in terms of like the boomer generation, right? Like these guys went
Mm.
off. They literally like fought the Nazis,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that was real,
Yeah.
like that they went into the trenches and like hand to hand combat with with Hitler,
For
right?
sure.
So like that generation was in a lot of ways defined that way, and then kind of like in the 50s and 60s things started to change, and there was more around you know things like being a hippie in
Right.
Vietnam happening, and a lot of people started to question
Oh, yeah.
this, and then the idea of
Started
more love
right.
and kindness, and right, and
Yeah.
all of this, of course, there was feminist movements happening
Yeah.
um, throughout all of this, and really women finally kind of getting to this place of stepping into their power, and um, and so look, from a historical perspective, we need somebody who's a historian, but like, I feel like for at least call it the 50s and 60s, I said 40 years earlier, it's probably been closer to, 60 or 70 years.
Right.
These definitions have changed. And I think where we are now is like, there's a group of people that are redefining masculinity, and they're saying,
Yeah.
hey, like emotional connection and vulnerability and authenticity and being in touch with really who we are as men is extremely important. And then I think there's still, folks that are really fighting that. Right. And
Totally.
you think about like our last president and, again, not a conversation for today, but like how he may have defined masculinity is going to be very different than us.
Yeah.
And so I think right now, like we're still seeing like that there's a fight going on between a
Yeah.
lot of these more historical values of whether it's the Teddy Roosevelt, as you said, or the John Wayne
Yeah.
definition of masculinity,
Yeah.
right? Or the Conan the Barbarian, right? Like I go take over my enemies, and then I get their women as well.
Yeah.
And so I don't know.
It's interesting.
I just think we're faced with this kind of rift right now where I feel like there's a lot of men waking up and saying,
Mm.
hey, the way that we've been conditioned, the way that we're doing things isn't working really for us and for
Yeah.
society's sake. But then there's also, I think, other people that are pushing back, and wanting those more traditional roles to stay in place. And I think that's when we talk about the war, like
It's the war.
I can relate, I can say, sure, like that to me is what, feels
That's
like
the
more of a
war.
war on masculinity is. And I actually don't even think it's that much coming from women. Like
No,
I
not
think that
anymore.
I think there's a part of women saying, hey, guys, stop being pieces of shit.
Right.
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 Like we're not going to tolerate some of the shit that your gender
Yeah.
has done for the last 10,000 years. Right.
Fair.
We're going to
Fair.
correct. We're going to speak up. We're going to talk about it. Like we're not playing that game anymore. Um, but I actually think there's probably more men that are still presenting in this way of, that very machismo experience. And that's probably just more of what we're seeing societally.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So,
interesting.
so what I'm curious about though is like, then on this, like, what is an alpha male?
Oh God.
Because we hear this
What?
term all the time, right?
Yeah.
Like we're going to be alpha, or like don't be beta, right?
Right.
So like, what's an alpha male, Roman?
Yeah. To be honest, I fucking hate those terms. I do. Because it's, to your point, man, we as society have decided that, specified roles no longer work, right? That we have to think outside the box. And within that, you have, some people that are good with that, some people that aren't. And there's a lot of people that are like alpha, beta. Yeah. And so I think to be an alpha means to beat your chest, to be strong, dominant, confident, to
So,
be
so,
alpha.
so you
Yeah.
think that's how society's defining it, or you're defining it?
I think both.
Okay,
I mean, largely how I define things is, congruent to how society defines things. Doesn't mean
got it.
that I necessarily accept or act on that, but as far as definitions, yeah, that would be alpha, right? The guy that walks in the room that everyone stops and sees, that can dominate a conversation, who's charismatic, who's a leader, and then a beta is the dude that stands in the corner, right? Doesn't really talk much, doesn't, and maybe those, descriptions are true, are accurate, but I think for me, it's all about motivation and aspiration. So it's like, am I motivated to be that definition of alpha? No, not really, not anymore. I used to. I used to be a chest pounding, arrogant, brash, imposing, dominant, confident, charismatic guy. I used to try to dominate every conversation I was in. I used to try to, unintentionally belittle others to, improve my own self-worth and my own stock, right? I used to fall into those definitions. But somewhere along the line, man, I realized that not only is that not what other people want, right? And so I think most of what we're driven by is in the acceptance of others. We want other people to accept us. We want other people to want us. I want a woman to accept me and to want me and to love me. And therefore, largely, most of my actions and ways of being are in alignment with what I think they want, right? And it's typically based on results. So when I was 18, 19, 20, it worked. I can be that brash guy. And it worked because 19, 20-year-old women were attracted to that, interested in that. And then, and then I grew up and I started to mature and I started to want to attract a higher level of women, higher level of friends, higher level of, business people. And therefore, like I had to change, I had to redefine the metrics in which I use to measure myself against
Sure.
everything.
So I just looked up the definition of alpha because I think it's like interesting, and I hadn't looked it up before. But it basically says something that is first, or
Okay.
another definition is a socially dominant person or animal.
There. There you go.
So,
Now, do you think that 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 is something to aspire to be?
well, I think it depends on how you define it.
By that
So,
definition of what you just read.
I mean,
Socially
again,
dominate.
but you think about this in the context of business, just business, right?
Yeah.
So, is it okay to be an alpha male when it comes to business? Meaning that I am dominant, right, over my competition or an industry, or right, that I want to be first in that particular thing. Yeah. Do I
I
want to
disagree.
operate? Do I want to operate my life as needing to be the first, the best, the no, right? So look, but
Yeah,
I tend to think,
disagree.
right, like how do we start a business where we say, yeah, I'm okay if I'm fifth or 95th, right? I think it's like, well, I got to look at the ways that I can try to dominate a
Uh,
particular space. No.
I I disagree.
Okay, so what's your take then?
Based on experience too, because I started a business that was very successful and I was alpha to the fullest, right? And I came in there like, I'm gonna dominate, I'm gonna make the money, I'm gonna be successful. And you know what happened? I got pushed out of my own fucking business because nobody liked me and nobody wanted me around.
Okay, but again, you're getting nuanced in it. I agree, right? This is why when I'm just saying with business, not in how we're a business partner, not how as we're an entrepreneur, not in terms of our relationships, but the reason that I brought it to that is when you say like, would I want to operate that way as purely based on that definition? I guess it would be how I take that and define it though,
Right.
right? Because I don't think that
Yeah.
there's this definition of it, which is like, can I be an incredibly kind, caring business owner that sees my partners, that takes care of my people, that is fully in touch with myself, that wants to be, super dialed in when it
Yeah.
comes to emotion and to constantly be pushing forward in my learning, my growth, my understanding, my abilities, and to grow my business that way. Right. So that's why I think like
Yeah,
it
we're
continues to come
getting
back
nuanced.
to
Yeah.
it continues to come back to me to these like this very individual defined conversation around it. Because I can say for sure there are ways in my life that I want to be alpha, no
Well, let me
question.
let me ask you this. We're getting sidetracked. Let me ask you this. If masculinity as a whole is changing as we've discussed it changing, can certain areas, roles, positions, places stay the same? Or does everything have to change across the board?
That's a great question.
Because I agree. I think in certain aspects, there are people, leaders, people out there holding on to the way it used to be and aren't as progressed as other areas. Business being one of them. Business, it's very much still strive to be alpha, dominant, right? But in other areas, that's no longer the case. Does that
Well,
work?
I think what I have to do is go and explore, right, and be curious about how I define alpha first and foremost, right? So you brought it up, like, do I need to go to something and to be the one that's recognized in this room? Do I need to be the biggest, call it physically, or right, this? Do I need to dominate this? Is my goal in something to dominate? Um, and so I think I have to like be, as a man, I've got to be curious about, right, like
Yeah.
how I'm defining this stuff for myself.
Yeah.
And then from there, it's like, well, okay, like if I don't agree with this and don't agree with the way that this has been portrayed or the belief systems that I have, then it becomes my responsibility to change it.
Mhm.
So with all of these things changing as you bring up, then absolutely there's no doubt that it's my responsibility
Yeah.
to pay attention, to ask questions, to be curious, and to say, hey, I've defined myself in a certain way for however long. Is it time for me to ask myself another question? Is this working for me? Is this working for people in my life? Is this working in the context of being a good human? Um, you know, I don't know. And so one thing I want to ask you is I want to also ask you, like, then what's toxic masculinity? Because we hear this shit all the time, right?
Mm.
It's toxic masculinity, right? And you're being a toxic man. And I think there's a direct parallel between the war on masculinity, if there is one, right? Which you and I are both, you say yes. I don't know. Toxic masculinity and the war on masculinity, I think, go hand in hand. So what's toxic masculinity?
Yeah, it's interesting. I looked up I looked up toxic masculinity, and prior to about 15, 20 years ago, that wasn't a term that was used,
No, no,
right?
no.
So I think you can kind of correlate the war on masculinity with the inception of toxic masculinity,
Okay.
right? So that is the war. I think toxic masculinity is a is too broad of a term, right? And anyone could spit that out at anything.
Uh-huh.
Boom, toxic
For
masculinity.
sure.
But I think overall toxic masculinity is just being a shitbag, right? It's just like a douche bag, shitty person, right? And it's like, oh, toxic masculinity. It's like, is it? Or is that guy just kind of an asshole, right? Because I have many friends who have been called toxic masculinity, have been called toxic. And it's like, I know them, they're not toxic. But in this one way of being, they're kind of a dick or kind of an asshole, you know? So I I hate the term toxic masculine. I hate the word toxic because it's like you could just anything's toxic when, it's like if somebody if somebody takes advantage of a woman at the bar who's intoxicated, right? That's not being toxic. That's a fucking predator,
Right.
right? So let's call it how it is.
It's not one and the same, though. I mean, yes, they need to be called a predator, no question.
Yeah,
But isn't that a toxic behavior? Isn't that something someone would look at and say that's an element of toxic masculinity? Is
for
is
sure.
preying on people?
My problem is it's a blanket statement. So then you
Sure.
have someone who's online saying, "Hey, I'm fucking confident and dominant, and I like that. And here's how. And people will be like, that's toxic. Don't put me in the same category as the dude that preys on chicks at the bar.
Okay.
That's not
Yeah. Yeah.
fucking fair. That's not
Okay.
right.
Okay.
The blanket
Sure.
statement is the problem. So
Got
let's
it.
stop using it and let's start calling people out for what they actually are. Hold people accountable, because toxic isn't doing it. And part of that war on masculinity is people like me are like, let's stop using that term, and because it's misused, it's not correct, you know. So let's call people out. Let's hold people accountable, right? With what they're actually wrong for, what their actual wrong actions are. Because it's not toxic masculinity. It's people are narcissists, people are assholes, people are predators, people are jerks, people are spouting misinformation. That's what they're wrong of. So
I greatly appreciate that, because I completely agree that the problem with the term toxic masculinity is that it's far too broad. It's
yeah,
We're unable to define. It's a generalization, and you're
yeah,
exactly right that there's a lack of accountability
yeah.
from what's actually going on,
Well, and
right?
that's the pushback too, isn't it? Is that if someone calls someone toxic, right? That's a label, man. That could
Yeah.
be like that could be damaging to someone's reputation, to them personally, their mental health, well-being. And if it's unjustified, then, that's where the other side is pushing back, you know? It's because they don't want labels like that. They don't want. Here's my question, I guess, to that point. Whose definition in opinion is more important in regards to masculinity? Is how you define masculinity more important, or how everyone else defines masculinity? Because if you're
Uh,
living in your truth, but it doesn't align with theirs, you're toxic, bud.
That's a fantastic question. I have to admit, because I think from the perspective of someone being like, "What do you mean?" Like, I spend all day like talking about how many women I want to be with, or kind of at all costs, and whether I'm manipulative in my efforts or any of that, right? And like, that's my truth, right? So like, that's my definition of masculinity.
Yes.
Um, I think for me, it comes down to not being a piece of shit. And to me, there's like a clear distinction here, right? When we take advantage of people, we're being a piece of shit. When we assault
Yes.
people, we're being a piece of shit.
Yes.
When we're manipulating people, we're being a piece of shit. When
Yes.
we're physically dominating people, we are being a piece of shit, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's a laundry list that we could keep going down on this,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and so for me, that's what it comes down to, is like, my definition can be, I guess, whatever I want it to be, right?
Yeah.
As long as what I'm doing is not hurting people.
Boom.
And what we've got to do as a society is we've
Preach
got
it,
to get
baby.
to a place where we recognize and have awareness that our behaviors are hurting people,
Mm.
right? Like,
Yes.
and this is a fascinating thing. Like, I recently learned about a Facebook group that women can go on and type in the name of their dude to see if they're being a piece of shit. Because
Whoa.
there's like tons of women that are on this group. It's like, it's a secret group. Maybe I'm blowing it up, but like, it's an
Damn.
example, right? So like, if you're being a piece of shit, you can go type dude's name in, and other women can be like, yo, yep, this is exactly how this dude treated me. This is do.
Damn.
And so
Like
again, we're
Yelp
just talking from
reviews
the
for
perspective
dudes.
of, yeah, I mean, look, we're talking from the perspective of being heterosexual men, right? And being
Right.
attracted to women. But like, our definition can be ours as long as we're not hurting people. And so
Yeah.
if we have no connection to our emotions or our intelligence, and we're at work and we're treating people terribly and we're not paying people living wages, right? Like
Mm,
that in itself is hurting people, right?
mm,
If we're taking
yeah,
advantage of our employees, right? And all right, there's so many ways to go into this. So the answer for me is I can define my masculinity by the terms and the definitions and the behaviors that I want, as long as that is not hurting anyone else.
dude, that's great. That's fantastic. I
So
love
like,
that.
so like, why is masculinity right now like such a trigger, Rome? You know, it feels like if you talk about like, oh yeah, like I'm a man. Right? If you just like said that, like I am a man, right? And like a good deep voice with like some strength behind it, some power behind it. Like, why do you think like people are triggered by that right now?
Oh man. Well, I think part of the problem is, you know what? I love first of all, I love the fact that you just blew up the spot on that Facebook group. And I also simultaneously love the fact that there's a Facebook group where you can go and you can get like a Carfax on, whoever you're
Yeah.
dating. Like,
Right.
what's the history? Right? I think
Yeah.
that's great because here's why masculinity and being a man is a trigger is because so many women have been hurt over and over by dudes who are, by all definitions, pieces of shit, right? Shitty fucking dudes. And therefore, it's part of that like almost PTSD conditioning is that dudes are going to hurt me. Dudes are shitty. Dudes cheat. Dudes lie. Dudes manipulate. Dudes this. Dudes that, right? So then you have like a large part of the population that have been chewed up and spit out by guys. And so it's like there's a bad taste in the mouth of women all across the world. So that when I, who am not a piece of shit, who is loving, caring, kind, compassionate, who is like I'm a good guy, right? When I want to enter into a relationship with a woman, like she's got her guard up, man. She don't trust anything I say, right? She's got insecurities from past dudes. And it sucks, man. It sucks in 2023 to date because I'm no longer just dating this person that I'm interested in or attracted to or that I care about. I'm also dating every man she's ever been with that hurt her.
Sure.
And, you know, it's not fair for me. It's also not fair for her. Right. So then, like, we're in this place where if I show up and I'm a man, like, there's a little bit of stigma that I must be a liar, a cheater, a manipulator. I'm going to hurt you. I'm not going to be there for you. I'm going to whatever.
Yeah.
And it
I
fucking
mean,
sucks.
look, and I'll just be real because it's the gut level. You know, I agree that I agree with everything you said, and I also want to be clear to like our audience that like I'm not perfect.
No,
I never been perfect before. Like, absolutely, I have operated in ways that at times in my life I'm really not proud of.
for sure.
That did hurt people, right?
Hands down.
That did
Yeah.
things that I wish I could go back and fix, that
Yeah.
did impact other people in a really negative way.
Yeah.
Um, for
Yeah.
me, it's all about continuing to grow beyond that, right?
Yeah.
And to acknowledge that, you know,
Yes.
there have been times in life where I have done that, and I think like
For sure.
what this opens the door, and you know, for everyone is to say, hey, like this is not Chris sitting here saying he's perfect, or that like
Right.
you know he's never
Yeah.
been a piece of shit, because actually like I have, right?
Yeah.
And I
Same.
think we
Same.
all have, and I'm
Yeah.
not just talking about men, I'm just talking about humans.
Humans.
We all
Yeah.
at times have done things to hurt other people. To me, it comes back to curiosity, awareness, right? That, like, look, I don't want to be somebody that continues to impact others in a negative way. And when I do,
Right.
and when there's repetition and pattern, I have to take a look at what that's about,
Yeah.
right? And so, like,
Yeah.
I don't want to be like a repeat offender in these
Yes.
things. And so if I'm
Yes.
reactive in a conversation with someone, I could hurt someone by the way I show up, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not a huge guy, right? But, like, I am going to be physically imposing to a small woman, for example, or a small person. I have a very deep voice, right? Which if I'm angry can seem aggressive,
Right.
right? So, like, even at
Yeah.
a minute level, right, where it's like I might just have a reaction and then my voice comes across, that might impact somebody in some which
Yeah.
way. And so I just wanted to be clear to, like, our community that I don't want to stand here and be like, oh yeah, like, saying don't be a piece of
No,
shit means I've
we're
never
not on
been
the
one,
soapbox.
because there's no question that at times, and in particular before I got sober,
For
that
sure.
that I did things that literally hurt people.
And even since then, and look, we're gonna have a podcast episode where, we talk about the intricacies of dating or being in a relationship. And I think in that episode, we can dive further into kind of these conversations. But I think that for men, one of our primary motivators in life, and probably for women too, if I'm being honest, I'm not a woman, so I can't say for certainty, is to find a partner to be with. Right? So a lot of our ways of being are dictated by how can we find a partner? How can we attract a partner? How can we, be with the partner and grow together, live together, be together, etc. And so masculinity 100% is part of that. The process of attraction, the process of finding, the process of being with. And I think this toxic masculinity and this war on masculinity, they go hand in hand, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. So
So
again, right, don't be a piece of shit. Be kind. Be loving.
that's it.
Right, care for
That's it.
people. Take care of people. Don't hurt people. And look, when we're not kind, when we do things that hurt someone, it's like, we got to have an awareness of this, guys. We cannot
Yeah.
continue to say, hey, this is just what men do. This is just how I am. Like, that's the stuff that's, like, not working anymore, right? We have to be able to say, hey, this is what's going on inside of me that continues to lead me to these places,
And
right?
don't
Of
you think
showing up.
honesty and being vulnerable, like, don't you think that that's the key?
Being honest with yourself, yes. Um, yeah, being honest with yourself and vulnerable. Um, yeah, and again, but I think that it's going to take pain for
Mm,
men to do this, and this is where I think that this is where I think masculine relationships are key,
mm,
because we have other guys on the path that are saying, hey, like, I don't want to hear about that again. I don't want to hear you talk about shit like that. I don't want to see you treat someone that way,
mm,
right? And, like, holding each other accountable,
yes.
but also strong women saying this is no longer acceptable, right? Like, these are the expectations here, and holding people accountable. And so, like, I think until that continues to happen on a larger scale, we're going to have trouble developing that vulnerability and that authenticity until we either hold ourselves accountable or we're held accountable by people in our lives, for sure.
I think the hardest part of that, I agree. I think the hardest part of that is there's no clear standard, right?
So so then so then tell me, what is the standard of masculinity, or the standards?
That's that's the problem, Chris. That's the problem. The same reason I'm so passionate that we should stop using the term toxic because it's too broad. Look, there's no clear definition for masculinity as we've discussed. Therefore, there's no clear standard, which means that it's all subjective. So, your definition of masculinity and my definition of masculinity completely separate, right? Therefore, I can do something that's acceptable to me and you can deem it unacceptable. And therefore, you have a society of people that all across the board have different standards for what is masculine and what is toxic masculine, right? And therefore, like, if I go out in public, I am under the standard of everyone around me, which is impossible. That's impossible. So until there is one clear standard, and I think we've discussed the standard at nauseum. You've mentioned it, I've mentioned it. The standard, the bar should be don't be a piece of shit. Don't hurt other people. And it's like, cool, that's the bar. Live life, don't hurt others. We live in a society now where anything goes, man. You can identify today as a camel, and it's okay. We're
Yeah.
good with it. We accept
Sure.
you, right? Whatever you identify with, whatever your gender, sex, ethnicity, race, political beliefs, spiritual, religious beliefs, we accept you for you, baby, right? We accept you. Don't hurt others. That's it. That's all we ask. Go through your life, do what you want, be who you want, be with who you want, act how you want. Just don't hurt others, man. And there is a clear line there. If your actions are hurting someone else in a negative way, no matter whether you think so or you agree with it, it doesn't matter. If it's hurtful, malicious, you're in the wrong. And that is toxic.
Well, and it's an amazing point. The flip side to that is when we feel hurt
Mm,
about who we
mm,
are, there's this next step where when someone hurts us, we got to pay
mm.
attention to how we then react, right?
Ah,
And
yes.
how we respond to that. Because
Yes.
this is something I agree with where you define yourself however you want, you call yourself whatever you want. We love you here. I could say Roman and I love you.
Yeah.
Awesome. But we live in a world where the world doesn't accept a lot of stuff. And
True.
so the second piece of that to me is yes, the standard is we can't hurt others
Yeah.
and we need to not be pieces of shit, right?
Yeah.
But the second piece is when somebody does hurt us for being us, for defining ourselves how we are, whatever it is, we have to be cautious of the stuff that comes out in us that then we want to react to.
Yes.
And then we feel justified, right? Which we
Yeah.
talked about last week, and anger
Oh,
and right justified anger and right
yeah.
all this stuff and how we rationalize our behaviors is, well, fuck them
Yep.
because they don't accept me. And so now I'm going to lash out
Yeah.
and engage or argue, fight, all this stuff too. And so again, I don't think that there's a clear answer to it. I
Mm.
just think like the more that we can be kind to ourselves and try to take a kind and loving tolerance of people, even if they
That's it.
don't accept us, even if they
That's
don't
key.
like us. And guess what? We have a choice today.
Mm.
And that
Yes.
to me, and look, these are, man, the rabbit hole we can continue to go down is crazy because look, there are things in this world that are repressive towards
Yeah.
people. They say
True.
like, hey, you're a woman, but like you ain't in charge of your body.
God.
Right. And so like then we get into some of this stuff and it's like, how do we deal with some of these even larger things? And so, I guess when it comes to
Yeah.
like this idea of like the war on masculinity and obviously I think we both agree here that the idea of toxic masculinity should be thrown out. It's just too broad of a term. We got to hold
To
people
hold people
accountable to
accountable.
what it
Yeah.
really is. We
Yeah.
got to not hurt people. We got to be kind and loving towards people no matter what.
Yeah.
And then like the flip side of this, which feels like a banger of an episode in the future, is going to be, well, then what do we do with men that are in power that control what like a woman can do with their body?
Oh my God.
Or,
Yeah. We're
I mean, because then, right, it's so easy for, and we're just using this term, but women to say, hey, these fucking dudes in power are fucking toxic, are
Mm,
unacceptable, are all the, and so again, it's just and here we're not about politics. We're not
no,
about outside issues. We are going to try to do our best here to remain as objective as possible and to not bring
totally.
our shit into it, although we will. So it doesn't matter to me what side of the coin you stand on about some of these issues, but there's such a deep rabbit hole to go down with,
Oh,
like,
bro, for sure.
the
That's
war
an
on
episode.
masculinity. We can look there and be like, there's a war on that, which is like,
Power.
yeah, wow. Okay. So then the power
Yeah.
dynamics that exist. Oof.
Oh God, that's gonna be a good one. Yeah, I think just in like conclusion, I would say we, me, you, some of us, a lot of us who work in health care,
Yeah.
in general, we are held to a code of ethics, right? And one of the main code of ethics in which we have to live by is do no harm,
Right.
right? That's like ingrained in my head, do no harm. And like that's almost impossible because like I might say something that someone's offended by and it's not on purpose, but the general thought is, try your hardest to do no harm, right? Since as long as I can remember, there has been the quote, hurt people,
Right.
right? I'm sure you've heard that. We've all
Of
heard
course.
that.
Yeah.
And I think a good, North Star for us as a community is to try to change that quote, change it to maybe hurt people, love people, right? To the point of like this eye for an eye shit has got to go.
Yeah.
If you're offended, like that's okay. If somebody's done something, hold them accountable. But then, you know, let it go. Frozen. Let it go. God, there's so many great places we can go with this. And dude, we can go another 4 hours on this topic. Masculinity, the war on masculinity. What does it mean? It's all subjective. Don't be a piece of shit. Don't hurt people. Act with love, kindness, tolerance. These are what we live by. Oh, God, that's a good one. Mm,
Yeah. 4 hours. There's no doubt. I think that's the
no,
beauty of these conversations, is that they more, to me, continue to present more and more question than they
yeah,
ever
I'm
do
like,
an answer. And that's what's so cool, I think, about, remember, we're not the experts and we do not have the solutions, but what we'll try
true,
to do is have some good questions and to remain curious
true.
about these things that feel super important to us and that we think probably are pretty important to society. And so, I mean, you kind of rapid fired some key takeaways. And I think, I add, in addition to that, is that, we have a responsibility as men to
Mm,
define what masculinity is and to have an awareness of this standard, which again is Romanized standard, I guess, but probably could be universally agreed upon, that our behavior should not hurt others.
yeah,
So if I have an awareness of that, then I can look at how do I need to grow from that. And that there is nothing wrong with defining how you want to, as long as we're not hurting people.
right.
Right.
Yeah,
So if I
yeah,
want to be the best in business and the protector and the provider and all of this, that's great. But that doesn't mean that I get to go out and get into a fight at a bar because I don't like how the guy looked at my lady. Right. It means that in a life threatening scenario, I can step in and be a protector, or, right. Like,
right.
and this to me is where the definition becomes so broad, is that, yes, as you mentioned, I want to be a provider. I want to be a protector. I also want to be really emotionally connected and vulnerable and authentic and
Yeah,
intelligent. And I want to work really hard, and I want to be driven, and I want to have purpose, and I want to have passion, and I want to be strong physically and all of these things. But to me, it's where, like, I got to combine all that, right?
yeah,
And have this, like, this thing that really works for me and works for the people that I
Mm,
care about and works in the world.
yeah. Yeah. I agree, man. It's like inside this tough shell of an exterior, I'm actually a sensitive person. And you know what? To me, that's masculine. And I'm good with it. So it's
100%.
whatever you want, whatever your definition of masculinity is all good as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. And if it does, or if you do hurt someone else, and this is another episode too, I got it down. Apologize, make it right. You know, you fuck up, that's fine. We all fuck up. Chris fucks up all the time. I hardly do, but Chris does all the time. And you know what he does? He takes accountability for his actions. He apologizes and he makes it right. He's someone we can all aspire to be more like. So, with that, the golden rule here, guys, is DBAD. Got it? DBAD. Don't be a dick. Boom.
I'm going to add one last piece before we move on to invitations, is that it's also about being the best version of us.
Ooh.
So it's not just what do I need to do to not hurt people and to like define masculinity for myself. It's also like, where do I feel truly in my power and expansive as a human?
Yeah.
Purpose, passion, right? Strength, freedom, right? All of these things that lead me to feeling like I am a truly embodied man,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
probably, again, a whole nother conversation about like, what is that? But like, let's be clear. It's not just about like, let's avoid, you know, let's just live our life to avoid all these guardrails. It's actually, how can I live in my absolute most power possible?
Mm.
Anyways, so
I love that, man. And I love that that's like, to be clear, if that's not your motivation, that's okay too. I think for us, for sure. I want to be the best. You want to be the best men that we can be, the best, fathers, brothers, sisters, like to do that. But if your goal in life and motivation and what makes you happy is to sit on the couch and play video games all day and you're good with that, that's fine. As long as you just don't be a dick, you know? And if you want more than that, that's cool too. There's clear and specific ways in which you can do that, which, we're not experts on, but we can certainly share with you. God, there's so many good places to go. This is
yeah,
up
and
here.
I know, and then I want to argue with you about that, but like we can argue in another episode. Like I actually don't think that anyone is okay with sitting at home being lazy on their mom's couch playing PS5
I
all
don't
day.
know.
Like I don't think that's why we're on this earth.
Yeah, I'm just
Um,
not sure it's like that I can have an opinion on that, you know?
no, I know that's what I mean.
It's
That's a fun
hard.
one. That's a fun one to dig
Yeah.
into at some point.
Like, I
Yeah.
personally don't think that's cool, but, like, if you do and you're happy, like, who am I to say otherwise?
I guess that's the good point. We let people
It's
be
hard.
and we
It's a
love on
double-edged
people,
sword.
and if you want something different, there's definitely something different.
Yeah. Boom.
Break it down, Rom. What's the word?
Every week, at the end, we start with one topic. Today's topic was the war on masculinity. Two perspectives, his, mine, and then three invitations. As always, the invitations are A, B, C. Awareness, barriers, call to action. Today, the awareness is, God, there's so much. I think some of the points that we made were that, there might be a war on masculinity, or masculinity could just be evolving, right? There's probably some pushback, and that's maybe okay. I think more is, how do we interpret it? What is the standard we set? And how do we use these definitions of masculinity in a good, positive way? Instead of calling people out for being toxic. Let's hold people accountable, you know, instead of, trying to be like something maybe that is you're not aligned with or is not authentic to you, you know, find what is authentic to you. There is no right or wrong definition of masculinity. It's all subjective, which means it's all on you. Just
Right.
don't hurt anyone. And I think the barriers to that, though, is that we live in a society today. And Chris, I want to hear from you, but we kind of live in a society today where there is a lot of vocalization around this topic, which means you can be heavily influenced by other people's definitions, opinions, you could be influenced by so much. And that's a barrier.
Yeah, get off social media. Like, we know that you're on YouTube watching this, but like, get off of social media. Stop listening to people, right? I mean, at best,
So,
use some of what you see to ask questions about whether, like Roman said, does that resonate with you? Is that authentic for you? Is that who you are, right? At a
yeah,
deep core level, but just stop listening to other people and how they
yeah,
define how you should live your life, how I should live my life. It's just too easy today to be like, yep, let me take 5 social posts, put them together, and like, that's my superpower ring, and that's who I'm going to
yeah,
be, versus saying, like, let me take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, a little bit from here, and then like define what this is going to be for me. But I don't need
yeah,
to be externally influenced in that way.
yeah, yeah. Be more like what we're trying to do and what we're trying to create over here at the gut level, right? It's, there's some opinions and some um, of us in this, but mostly it's just to stay curious, right? To have open conversations with the goal being curiosity. Let's learn, let's share, like, let's break things down. I think that that's probably the best way to be.
No doubt. And the
Mm,
call to action has to be, again, exactly what you just said. We remain curious. We ask the questions. We look at how we're defining masculinity today, and we make sure that we like the definition, that we sleep really well at night with who we are and how we define this, that things are going
yes.
well in our lives, that relationships are good, that we're not hurting people. Um, it's, we got to take a look. We got to look in.
Yeah. And please, for the love of the universe, stop using toxic masculinity to call someone out.
Yeah.
Just call them out for what they're actually doing. Stop
Yep.
using toxic. Move towards something else,
Good
right?
call.
Jerk, asshole, scumbag, douchebag, liar, cheater, manipulator, narcissist, like whatever it actually is, use that. We're overusing toxic. So please, that would be my additional call to action that we can all start using today.
Love it.
Mm.
Whew. Well, another one.
Another one.
Another one.
Major keys. We the
Gut level.
best.
Gut level.
I love you, bro.
I love you
Hey,
too.
this one was a banger. You
This
know that?
one?
This one right here.
I got it. Yeah.
Banger. Banger, banger. Love you guys. As always, please stay off of social media. But while you're on, go like, comment, follow, subscribe, comment, check out the links, reach out to us, connect with us. We want to hear from you. We're building a community. We are not experts. We're just two dudes having conversations, and we would love for you to be part of that. So you can follow us everywhere, all social platforms at the gut level, right? You can also email us at thegutlevel@gmail.com. We will, reach back out to you if you reach out to us. And then check out the links below, always, every time. And then share with us, what are your thoughts on masculinity? Is there a war on masculinity? Like, we want to hear from you guys. We want to interact. This is a community, not necessarily a channel. This is just where we happen to be. So,
No doubt.
God.
Thanks for joining us as always, yo. We love you. Join us next time at the gut level.
Peace out, baby. Bro, you're so toxic, dog.